Hello, everybody. How are you all doing today? Thumbs up. Awesome. Well, as Jillian said, my name is Morgan Treaster, and I'm going to be your all's guest presenter today. And I am so glad that I can be here to talk with you all today about self-esteem and body image. And I also just wanted to thank you all for having your videos on today. That is so nice to see your actual faces. I've done a lot of presentations and teenagers have been turning off their videos. So thank you for having that video on. And I also see that you all are doing a great job at keeping yourselves muted. I do want this to be kind of interactive. So if at any point you want to unmute yourself to ask questions or just kind of make a comment on any of the material, that is totally fine. I welcome that. You can also use the chat feature if you have questions, and I will try to monitor that as we go as well. And then how long are you all here? How long is your kind of class period or the length of this meeting? Do you guys typically end at like a certain time or anything? No? Until 2. Okay, perfect. That works for me. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't leave you here too long. I have been in those classes that seem like they never end. Well, I thought I would start out today by just talking with you all a little bit about myself and giving you some background. So I got my bachelor's degree in psychology from Susquehanna University in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. And then I moved in 2016 to Johnson City, Tennessee to get my doctorate in clinical psychology from ETSU. And so that is a 5-year program, and I am in my 5th and final year. And so that final year is actually a year-long internship training that is somewhere else in the country. So I am actually talking to you all from Madison, Wisconsin right now. And I am doing my year-long internship training, and I have a special interest in working with children and adolescents who actually have a medical condition of some kind. So I work with a lot of patients who have cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular kind of health problems. And I really do a lot of therapy with them and their families to help with emotional and behavioral adjustment to having that medical condition. So I see a lot of kids and teens who have a lot of fears and worries surrounding medical procedures and being in the hospital. I do a lot of work with low self-esteem in cancer patients, primarily related to their physical appearance, just because of all the bodily changes that happen as they undergo chemotherapy and other treatment regimens. So I do have some experience in the topics of self-esteem and body image, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that I will share with you and work through. But again, I'm hoping that this will be kind of interactive. And so I encourage you to unmute yourselves and ask questions as we go. So hopefully, I tried this when I joined and it worked. We will see if it continues to work. All right, can you all see my screen right now? Give me a thumbs up. Perfect. All right, so what I'm really hoping that you guys will get out of today's experience is to have a better understanding of what is self-esteem, what is body image, and then we're going to talk specifically a little bit about eating disorders, just because it kind of falls into this general category as well. I also want you all to become more familiar with what are some of the contributing factors or causes that contribute to different levels of self-esteem and body image. We'll also reflect and talk a little bit about, and I hope you get a better understanding of what are your personal areas of struggle or concern, whether that's related to self-esteem or body image. And then we'll talk at the very end about what are some different things that you could do at home to really increase your self-esteem and view yourself from a more positive perspective. So first, to start out, what is self-esteem? So if you guys want to use the chat feature or unmute yourselves and talk, that's fine too. But when you hear the word self-esteem, how would you define that, or what words come to mind for you all? Confidence in yourself? Yes, that's a great one. Anything else that comes up for anybody? Jonathan says something I don't really have. I really appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and to share that with the group. And I want you to know too that you're not alone in that. I think that is probably one of the most common things that comes up when I work with teenagers is having that low self-confidence. And we'll talk about why that's the case for a lot of teenagers. All right, so, and I apologize, when you screen share, the chat feature gets a little bit weird. So in terms of what is self-esteem, so I kind of typically classify people into one of two categories. So on one side, we have those who have very high self-esteem. So these are people who really believe in themselves. As somebody had mentioned, you have confidence in your abilities. There's usually this sense of self-worth or respect and pride that you have in your actions and the things that you do day to day. People with higher self-esteem typically also have a pretty clear sense of their personal values or what's important to them, whether that's friends, family, health, different hobbies and activities. And with those personal values, they oftentimes have a lot of confidence doing behaviors that align with what's important to them. People higher in self-esteem also tend to have a sense of belongingness. They feel liked and accepted. And that is self-acceptance, but also acceptance by the people around them. And then with high self-esteem too, we have this sense of control or responsibility. And then on the other hand, with lower self-esteem, there are things like negative self-talk and criticism. So these are individuals who tend to beat themselves up. And I always say they're kind of their own worst critic, and they always feel like they're letting themselves down or they're letting people down around them. There's usually this fear of making mistakes or of disappointing those around them. People with lower self-esteem often feel insignificant or they feel unimportant and not valued in society. And then there's usually this weak or missing sense of control or responsibility. So they feel like everything around them is kind of beyond their control and there's nothing they can do to change their situation or change their environment. So the next question then is, what influences a person's level of self-esteem? So what do you think are some of the factors just as a teenager that contributes to whether a person has high or low self-esteem? Yep, comparing themselves to other people their age, absolutely. And that's a really common thing to do as a teenager is you're always comparing yourself to that other person that's your age or to people that are older than you. Any other factors that you think play into that? That's definitely one of the biggest ones. So you're absolutely right. And you'll see here that social comparisons piece. So when we think about, what are the different factors that contribute to ranking yourself as high or low with self-esteem? So those with higher self-esteem, they actually tend to hold kind of realistic expectations for themselves. So they set goals and standards for themselves that are actually achievable and attainable in some way. People with higher self-esteem also tend to have more appropriate and healthy social comparisons. And so they may do that comparison process with other people their age. But that comparison process almost allows, it's not necessarily detrimental to how they view themselves. So they compare themselves, and sometimes that can give them kind of motivation or desire to continue to work at that self-improvement. And then individuals with higher self-esteem too tend to have stronger relationships with friends and family members. On the other hand, those with lower self-esteem often have very unrealistic expectations for themselves. So they kind of set the bar really, really high for themselves and always kind of feel like they're falling short of their own goals and expectations that they have. They may also feel like the people around them are holding them to too high of expectations. Whether this is, teachers having too high of expectations for classwork and for extracurricular activities. It might be parents who have kind of, from the teenager's perspective, unrealistic expectations for housework and chores and responsibilities. And then we also have that unfavorable social comparison piece that I think Tanner had mentioned in the group chat, where teenagers will compare themselves to other people, and they do it basically as a way to pick themselves apart. Well, that person has prettier eyes than I do, or nicer hair, or a better body, and because of that, then I feel badly about myself. We see that stressful life events also contribute to low self-esteem. So things like divorce of parents, a major move, starting at a new school. Those are all kind of different life events that have been shown to impact self-esteem. We also have to think about things like mood disorders. So with both anxiety and depression, we see that low self-esteem can kind of be a symptom that gets lumped into both of those mental health disorders. And so if you have that clinical diagnosis, self-esteem tends to be a little bit more difficult for you to experience. And then we have, Jonathan says self-esteem too is feeling like you mess up at just about everything. Yeah, it's kind of like nothing that I do is ever good enough or ever right or ever perfect. Absolutely. And Jonathan, we'll talk a little bit about what are some ways that you can help to kind of build up your self-esteem when you find yourself falling into those patterns and habits. Bullying is something else that we know too contributes to low self-esteem. And I think this is a really common experience for kids and teenagers in the academic setting. And so this can look like physical bullying, so being punched, hit, kicked. This can also be that verbal and emotional bullying, like name calling, teasing, taunting, making some fun of somebody for if they mess up or if they make mistakes, teasing other people for their physical appearance. And then there's the loneliness piece. So individuals with lower self-esteem oftentimes have a pretty small network of friends. They may not have friends at all, and they really tend to spend a lot of time by themselves because it's hard for them to make and keep those friendships. Oh goodness, it's not gonna let me move on, guys. All right, let's see here. Technology, it's great when it works. So I guess we can pause here while I get this pulled back up, and I'll ask if anybody has any thoughts or reflections on any of the information that has been shared so far. We can also pause here. Oh, were you going to say something? No. We can also pause here. And did you all get the self-esteem survey that I had sent out prior to today, where it's kind of a bunch of questions that you sort of figure out what is your level of self-esteem? You guys remember getting that? Did any of you have a chance to take that or complete that before today? Couldn't print it out? Yeah, that's totally okay. Did you guys have a chance to at least look at the questions, or if you maybe have it accessible to you, you could pull it up right now? I would just kind of be curious to have you all look over that, or if you were able to print it out and complete it. I would be curious to see kind of where you all would rate yourself on self-esteem, and if any of those questions really stood out to you as an area where you have pretty good self-esteem or maybe not so much. What would you guys say? Are there any areas where you feel like you do have good self-esteem? Oh, we got something here from Jonathan. So main factors in low self-esteem are horrible life experiences. Yeah, gosh, Jonathan, you have been through a lot. And then pre-existing mental health stuff. Yeah, sounds like you're really kind of aware of even some of the factors that have contributed to your low self-esteem. And I'm so sorry that you have gone through all of those difficult things. That's a lot for one person as a teenager. Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I certainly won't force anybody to share more than than they're comfortable with. But I would encourage you all to reflect, or even just look over that questionnaire to see what questions stand out to you as strengths or weaknesses with your self-esteem. So the kind of next section I have is getting into why is self-esteem important? So I'm going to leave it like this if that doesn't bother you guys too much, because it seems to work a little bit better. So self-esteem is important because there are just so many life areas that are impacted by self-esteem. And so when we think about this, social relationships are impacted. So, the extent to which you're connected with friends, families, teachers, romantic partners, if you're dating. We know that self-esteem impacts school and job performance. So those with lower self-esteem tend to get lower grades or experience more difficulties keeping up with assignments or keeping up with responsibilities if they have a job at this point. We know that self-esteem also impacts participation in extracurricular activities, so your ability to concentrate and really focus when you're doing sports or other enjoyable hobbies. And those with lower self-esteem tend to get less enjoyment out of those activities as well. We know too that it's linked closely to emotional health, as I had mentioned earlier, so anxiety, depression, and risk for suicide. Those with lower self-esteem, we also know, are more likely to engage in a lot of risk-taking behaviors. So alcohol and drug use, risky sexual practices, and even criminal behaviors that can oftentimes get them involved in the legal system in some way. And then those with lower self-esteem tend to have just more unhealthy lifestyle habits in general. So they have either difficulties falling or staying asleep, or they may sleep all the time just to kind of escape the unpleasantness that they're experiencing day to day. With lower self-esteem, we tend to see that they're less likely to engage in regular exercise and oftentimes don't have well-balanced nutritional habits either. So then the other thing that was kind of on the agenda for today was body image, which is really linked in closely to self-esteem. And so with body image, this really refers to kind of how people think and feel about their bodies. And so you can imagine those with lower self-esteem are probably going to think more negatively and feel more negatively about their physical appearance. And in terms of how people think and feel about their body, this is oftentimes influenced with how much weight or value they put into what other people think about them. So other people's opinions oftentimes become one's own opinion of themselves, especially in cases of lower self-esteem. So if that person gets a lot of criticism or negative feedback from other people about their appearance, then the individual is going to be more likely to kind of think that those things are actually true of themselves. And there's been some research that's done that has actually shown that about 35% of teenagers report that body image causes them to often or always worry. And we see a lot of research showing too that the rates of this is higher in females compared to males. So what kinds of things do teenagers dislike about their body? And you can use the chat function here as well. Even you can think about yourself, you can think about your friends and the people around you, or what you've heard kind of other teens say about themselves and things that they don't like. You don't care about your body image. Facial features, yeah. Facial features, that definitely comes up sometimes. Anything else that anybody can think of? Depends on the person and their self-esteem. Honestly, almost anything. Yeah, you are exactly right about that. It varies a lot from person to person in terms of what they do or don't like about their physical appearance. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. So yeah, I had a few examples, but with the facial features piece, circling back to that, one of the most common things that comes up in teenagers is like acne, facial hair, and those types of things that especially come up during as teenagers approach puberty and go through that process. That can be a time in life where people tend to have a lot of insecurities about the way they look. Another one that comes up a lot for people is their weight. And I think this too is more common in females, but we're seeing a lot of research of weight issues and weight insecurities coming up in males as well. So I think those are the two biggest common ones. We can also see, things like the size of different body parts. So my arms are too big, my legs are too small, my head is shaped weird. These are just some examples of ones that have come up in patients even that I have worked with. And even in my work too with, kids who have medical issues of some kind, especially when I'm working on the cancer floor, it's kids who have a lot of insecurities about losing their hair or experiencing changes with their bone strength and their bone density. So yeah, you guys did a great job with that. So why do you think people have negative body image as teenagers? Like, what do you think are some of the factors that go into that? Jonathan, it looks like you're again hitting on that kind of puberty and the extent to which that shapes perceptions. Yeah. Yes, I can absolutely repeat it. I just asked, what are some factors that you feel like contribute to why teenagers have a negative body image? What are some of the pressures or the contributing factors there? Yeah, girls like to compare themselves to models. That is absolutely true, and definitely one of the things that I had on my next slide. So you are exactly right about that. So factors influencing body image. So puberty, which we've already touched on. We also have to think about things like physical disabilities. So some teenagers who may only be able to get around in a wheelchair, for instance, oftentimes have a lot of insecurities about their physical presentation. Then we get on what you had mentioned in the chat about those kind of ideal body images that are portrayed in the media. Whether that's in television shows, we can also think about kind of models that you see in magazines, on billboards. They send really strong messages about what we should look like in society. And so for women, it's oftentimes an ideal of being kind of very thin, having clearly defined curves, expectations in terms of just facial appearance and how much makeup to wear and how to put on the makeup. For men, there's a lot of ideals put out there about, being muscular and well-defined and having abs and looking kind of strong and really making a presence in the room. We also have to think about the impact too of the family environment. So individuals who come from a family where they receive criticism or teasing from their siblings or from their parents are more likely to have low self-esteem and a negative body image. There's also things such as eating behaviors in the home and how that kind of impacts a teenager's own eating habits and then in turn how they feel about themselves. And then we have parental modeling of negative self-image. And for both kids and teens, parent behaviors are a very strong influence over what we do as teenagers or as our own human beings. And so if parents are very kind of critical of their own appearance and kind of model that negative self-talk, we see that teenagers oftentimes do the same things with themselves. And then there's the peer relationships piece. So we've talked already about bullying. There's also a really strong desire for teenagers to be accepted into different social groups. And so for that acceptance, they oftentimes feel like they have to meet a particular ideal or standard in terms of physical appearance to feel welcomed and accepted. So I know I am throwing a lot of information at you, so I will again pause to see if anybody has any thoughts or reflections on stuff so far. All right. Well, then I also wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of narrowing down from this broader focus of body image to talking specifically about eating disorders. And I know this wasn't necessarily on your list of clear objectives for today, but I do think it's relevant and important to talk about when we think about body image and self-esteem. So I don't know how much kind of background experience or familiarity you all have with different types of eating disorders, but there are kind of three main categories or ones that typically come up and are diagnosed in a clinical setting. So the first one I think is one that a lot of people have heard of, which is this idea or concept of anorexia, where you have a person who really has strong fears of gaining weight. They have a desire to be very, very thin. And so to do that, they will reduce their food intake greatly. So they may try to go days without eating or eating just very minimal calories. And over time, this impacts the functioning of their different bodily systems, and organs will start to shut down, and they usually have to seek medical treatment to become stabilized again. But despite this kind of very low daily caloric intake, and having a very low BMI, when you actually look at what their body mass index is, individuals with anorexia will still look in the mirror and see a very overweight, heavy person. So they have kind of a distorted and biased view of themselves and their weight and their physical appearance. Another kind of clinically diagnosed eating disorder is bulimia. And so this is where a person will eat very, very large amounts of food in a short time. It's oftentimes called like a food binge. And when they're going through kind of the motions of eating all of those items, they oftentimes feel like that's beyond their control. So it's more than just kind of like pigging out or kind of enjoying a really large meal at the holidays or at a party. These are kind of like designated episodes where people will really just like go through their house and eat, you know, an entire pack of Oreo cookies, followed by drinking half a gallon of milk, followed by, you know, sitting down and eating a whole bag of chips, like back to back to back in a very short period of time. And then after they do all of that and the behavior stops, they oftentimes feel this really strong sense of guilt for what they have done. And so they will try to make up for that in some way. And so usually that involves self-induced vomiting. They may also use diuretics, excessive exercise to try to burn off those calories, or they'll do fasting where they will, again, try to go long periods of time without eating. But what that typically does is trigger another binge at some point in the future when they're so hungry. Individuals with bulimia usually have a desire for weight loss and a fear of gaining weight. But because they are still eating pretty large quantities of calories, they're usually able to maintain a normal body mass index. And so to kind of the average person who just looks at them, they wouldn't necessarily look at them and know that they have an eating disorder compared to what you might see with anorexia. And then the third kind of major type is binge eating disorder. So this is, again, eating that large amounts of food in very short periods of time. The difference between binge eating and bulimia is that with binge eating, you don't have that kind of make-up behavior where they attempt to kind of right their wrong through the self-induced vomiting or laxative. And so these people, because they are taking in really large amounts of calories, often have a pretty high body mass index and body weight. There's been a lot of research on the rates of eating disorders in teenagers. And so there was one study that came out that found about 2.7% of teenagers will be diagnosed with an eating disorder at some point in their lifetime. And these kind of disorder patterns of eating oftentimes develop during kind of the teenage years, but they may be just a little bit older until it's actually clinically diagnosed and recognized. We do see that the rates are higher in females compared to males. And there is more and more research coming out about rates of anorexia in males in particular. It was previously kind of thought to be and kind of stigmatized as this female-only disease. But we know that there are males out there who struggle with anorexia as well. And males with anorexia are more likely to be diagnosed at an older age or later in life because there is all of this stigma and people don't necessarily think to like screen or look for that disorder. And because they are diagnosed later in life, they're actually at a greater risk for death. And that's usually because their condition has progressed to the point that their body is like physically shutting down and not working anymore. Their organ systems aren't working correctly. And there's really just a lack of nutrition even going to the brain. And so all of that heightens the risk for mortality. We also know that both male and female high school athletes are actually at greater risk for disordered eating. And this is oftentimes due to, again, the body expectations or standards that are there for different types of sports. So for example, one thing that comes to mind for me is wrestling. And there are usually, you know, weight classes that individuals have to kind of compete under, and they have to make weight every week before a tournament or a wrestling match. And so they oftentimes have to go to extremes, whether that's starving themselves or eating a whole bunch of food leading up to a wrestling match or tournament in order to make weight and compete. And so this is where we start to see some of those unhealthy habits being picked up. And then we know that the average age of diagnosis for an eating disorder is usually between the ages of 18 and 21, but that does vary depending on the type of eating disorder. So that kind of wraps up just all of the background information that I wanted to give you all on self-esteem, body image, eating disorders, and different factors that contribute to that. So I do have kind of one final just wrap up section on like what are some different strategies and ways that you can use to increase your self-esteem. But before I moved into that, I wanted to give a chance for any questions or comments on any of the information that has been presented so far. All right. Well, if you guys think of anything, feel free to throw it in the chat. I will keep moving on though. So how can I increase my self-esteem? So if you've identified yourself as a person who does experience a little bit lower confidence in one or more areas, I wanted to share with you all some different kind of strategies and things even that I sometimes work on individually with patients during therapy sessions or when they're at the hospital for any reason. And these are helpful for kids. These are helpful strategies for teenagers, and sometimes I even do these with parents. So they can really kind of go across the age spectrum. So the first one is this idea of verbal or written positive self-affirmations. So I don't know if you all have ever heard of the word self-affirmation, but it's really just this kind of directing kind words towards yourself. So instead of saying something like, I will never be good at soccer, you can say something like, I'm trying my best on the soccer field. And I think the use of these requires you to recognize and notice within yourself when you are engaging in that self-criticism or that negative self-talk. Because if you don't recognize that you're doing it, it's really hard to kind of prompt yourself to be like, oh, okay, I should try to reframe this or word it in a more positive way. I'll encourage people, if you feel like you do really struggle with self-esteem, to start and end each day by saying or writing 3 to 5 positive self-affirmations. So just, again, kind words directed towards yourself. Maybe it's kind words about a previous accomplishment that you had, or just kind of compliments to yourself, honestly. And then it can even be helpful to kind of remind yourself of those positive words by doing things like writing them on sticky notes and putting them around your house at places that you may often go to, such as the refrigerator door or the bathroom mirror or your bedroom door, maybe the front door, maybe it's in your backpack. And kind of another version of this would be that you could set up that, you know, your phone or your computer sends you kind of set an alarm where it will send you a positive self-affirmation. There's also, I think, lots of good apps that you can download, or kind of apps that will like send you a daily text with like an encouraging quote or phrase. So that can be other kind of ideas or versions of that. Another thing that can sometimes be helpful for people is to document their successes or their accomplishments, which can be really hard to do if we have low self-esteem. So sometimes what I'll have people do is keep a daily log where they each day do an entry and they write down 3 to 5 things that they did really well that week. And I always tell them it doesn't have to be anything groundbreaking or huge. So for example, when I work with teenagers who have pretty severe clinical depression, sometimes it can be hard for them to even like get out of bed in the mornings. And so sometimes when they bring their log into me, one of their daily accomplishments is like, I got out of bed before 2 p.m. today. And that is an accomplishment and a success for them, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be, you know, earning straight A's on all your assignments that day or kicking the game-winning goal in a soccer match. And then if you can even kind of read over that list of 3 to 5 things each day, or at the end of each week, to just remind yourself of the accomplishments that you made, that can also be helpful for kind of promoting more of that positive thinking. Another version of this even would be to keep a journal of your personal strengths and characteristics and qualities about you, and kind of adding 1 or 2 things to that every single day. And then, you know, something else that can be helpful, I don't know if you all have ever heard of SMART goal setting. But when we think about low self-esteem, usually people want to change or improve upon something in their life, and they have pretty lofty goals that they have set for themselves. So I do a lot of work with people on setting what we call SMART goals, which SMART is an acronym that stands for different qualities or characteristics of like what is a good goal. And so SMART stands for, so the S stands for specific. So you want to set a goal for yourself that is not vague and broad in general. So for example, a good goal would not be something like, I want to lose weight. A specific goal would be something like, I want to lose 2 pounds over the next month. You also want the goals that you're setting for yourself to increase your confidence to be measurable. And so how are you going to know if you achieve the goal? Like, what standards are you going to be using? So if we think about the weight loss example, the way to measure it would be stepping on the scale each week. If we think about, sometimes I work with teens who set goals surrounding kind of conditioning that they want to do for sports. And it's like, well, I want to be able to run a mile in under 10 minutes. And so the way to measure that would be through a stopwatch and keeping a daily log of like what were their times for each mile that they tried to run. You also want the goals that you set for yourself to be achievable. And I think this is one of the places where teens tend to get themselves in trouble a little bit, which is that they have pretty unrealistic expectations for themselves. And so, set something that can easily be attainable. You want to set yourself up for success, not failure. And so you can always start by kind of setting a goal that you're like, well, that should be pretty easy for me to achieve. And that's fine. You can make it more difficult for yourself over time. You also want goals that you set for yourself to be relevant. And so make sure it's something that's important, that actually means something to you, because nobody's going to have motivation or interest in achieving a goal or completing a confidence challenge if it doesn't mean anything to them and it's kind of just irrelevant. And then the T stands for timely. So set a time limit on how long are you going to give yourself to achieve that goal. And so with all of these kind of different activities and interventions, I've also passed along, and you guys may have already received these. I think she had said to put them in your binder, but some different kind of worksheets and handouts that go along with these different interventions that you can do with as you please. And perhaps you will find them useful at some point in the future. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of put in a plug for some other resources that are available if you feel like you're experiencing a lot of low self-esteem or other negative emotions. So of course, take advantage of the support systems that you do have available to you, whether that is friends, parents, teachers, principals, guidance counselors, sports coaches, leaders of different school-based organizations and clubs that you're a part of, or even a faith community, if that is something that is important to you. I also always like to spread the word about this next resource. So I don't know if you all are aware, but there is a phone number, a texting number that you can use 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you ever find that you're experiencing a lot of stress related to school, if you yourself are personally experiencing any type of emotional or mental health difficulties, if you text the word HOME, so just HOME, to 741-741, it will connect you with a kind of trained crisis counselor or mental health counselor on the other end, who is just simply there and available to talk with you and to offer you support and work through whatever it is that you're going through at that time. It is confidential and anonymous, but they will also make sure that they are keeping you safe. So if there are concerns about your safety, so if you're having suicidal thoughts or you're wanting to be connected to community-based resources, that's certainly something that you can communicate with them, and they can help get you connected to resources to ensure your safety and to support you. And then, of course, there's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number, a 1-800 toll-free number, again, where you can call that number at any point, talk to somebody, and they will provide you with support and work you through whatever you are going through at that time. So please take advantage of those resources, because I know sometimes it can be hard to reach out to people that we're close to around us to talk about some of these more difficult things, but there's always somebody out there. There's always somebody available for you, and that is in the form of these two resources. So that is what I had for you all today on self-esteem, body image, eating disorders, and ways of helping. And then some references that went into this presentation as well. So I think we have about 10 minutes or so left, but I wanted to open up the floor for any questions. You can unmute yourselves if you have questions or thoughts, reflections that you would like to share with everybody. Anybody have any bright words they want to share with us? All right. Well, I appreciated your all's time today and being here and allowing me to share some of that information with you. I did not put it in the presentation, but I am always available to answer questions, or if you want more information on anything, I'm happy to chat with you through email, and I will put my email in the chat bar if you guys want to follow up on anything at any point in the future. All right. I am sure you all are just as tired as I am, sitting in front of a computer all day, joining Zoom meetings and chats and doing school online and all of that wonderful stuff. So I certainly will not hold you guys here until 2 o'clock. But I appreciate your attentiveness and your participation today. And I will watch my email over the next few days to see if there's anything that comes through. And you can always reach out to Jillian, and she can be in touch with me as well. All right. You guys are very welcome. I hope you guys have a good rest of the day. Thank you.